All right, Scott Golden here on the 22nd of April 2020 with a little bit of wrestling news. Just a short update right now. Probably going to do another news update later in the day at some point. But something just crossed my computer screen that has my head ready to explode, and I figured it might get YouTube views to have my head explode on audio. So it appears that Governor DeSantis of Florida, approximately 6 days ago, and I had heard about this, but I hadn't heard the exact quote until it just crossed my desk that there was a video made about this. It appears that the governor of Florida has deemed pro wrestling to be an essential service. Now, that sounds pretty wookie to me, and I'll admit, okay, here's the deal. As a kid, I was abused. Pro wrestling was my escape. It's the only thing in nearly 40 years of life that hasn't in some way left my life in one way or another. I'm like the guy that would defend wrestling to the death. If there was a legitimate reason, I'm that guy, okay? But here's the thing. They've deemed pro wrestling an essential service because, and I quote, people are getting restless without having content on television. Therefore, it is essential for Floridians to have pro wrestling. Now, that is a paraphrase, but the governor, now this is as in one of the 50 people that runs the country, has said this. Now, I have a few questions. Number one, if we live in a country full of 330 million plus people who cannot cope with having over 500 options on television, not to mention streaming services, not to mention unlimited music services, not to mention other options like video games, and et cetera, and so forth until the cows get home, we have a much bigger problem than the coronavirus. If there are people who cannot cope with the fact that watching people roll around and fake fight for a few hours a week when there's literally probably close to 50,000 hours of such available for under $100 a month between all the streaming services that are out there, again, another problem. Now, another issue that I have. Let's suppose this is true. Let's suppose there are people that are ready to curl up in a corner because they don't have access to a Roman Reigns versus Baron Corbin match for the 178th time. Let's suppose that these people are about to have a mental breakdown. Let's suppose these people are about to have a mental breakdown that's going to end the world. Does that still mean, by theory, that perchance it's a good idea for the men and women in professional wrestling, regardless of organization, regardless of place in the world, to risk their lives to fake fight so that little Bobby in the corner doesn't cry himself to sleep at night? Furthermore, going further, is it a good idea that perhaps the same people should go home to their potential spouses, girlfriends, whomever, who could be pregnant, and put their unborn children at risk because people can't manage without some fake fighting in their lives, when there are other options? I guarantee the same people that cannot cope with the fact that Monday Night Raw or Friday Night SmackDown is not on television could find something they like to watch on the internet or broadcast television, or go outside and go for a walk, even though they can't go into a business, or they could read a book, or they could listen to an audiobook, or they could. I'm sorry, but this is a smoke screen. Let's back up just a little bit. Fact. The McMahon family has at times in the last 30 years of publicly known history been one of the richest families in the country, if not the world. The net value of Vincent K. McMahon has at times toppled over $1 billion, making him probably at the time one of the between 2,000 to 3,000 richest people on the planet. Thus, he's an influencer. Thus, influencers get what they want. And he doesn't want to lose money, because if he loses money, he's going to not have enough money to buy ketchup for his steak or something. Now, keep in mind, if we go to President Trump and we look at his cabinet at the early stages of his presidency, we find a very robotic, a very non-charismatic Linda McMahon as one of the people who happened to be a member of that cabinet, Director of Small Business Association, or SBA, or something like that. The exact term I'm unfamiliar with, because I only follow politics on a cursory level, because quite honestly I find U.S. politics to be a bigger work than professional wrestling ever could be. Anyway, so she's rubbing elbows with the president. You don't suppose that maybe, just maybe, because they've had a conversation or three over the past few years, that they didn't have a direct line to President Trump and his associates and his staff to be able to say, oh no, Vince McMahon will not be able to buy another bearskin rug. Uh-oh, let's do something about this. And here's another thought. If we believe that professional wrestlers are role models or people of influence, and I believe both, if they are out there performing their trade and plying their craft on national and international television for the world to see, does that not send a message to anyone who will listen that potentially it is safe to be out in the public? Now, the narrative on professional wrestling fans from probably the television age beginning in the 1940s, if not before, is that they're underintelligent. Although this narrative is not true, let's suppose that the mainstream media believes this narrative. So, we are in theory giving underintelligent people a recipe to watch their heroes go out and perform in front of a non-live audience for their benefit multiple times per week, which automatically, if the average fan is as slow as it's believed they are, and they're not, but let's just play the game for a minute. If that fan is as slow as we believe they are, then doesn't that mean they're going to go, hey, Bob, we can go outside now. We can go out to play. Let's play basketball. Let's play tiddlywinks. Let's hug each other in the middle of the park. Because now we've given people permission to go and do these things because the people they look up to and admire are out there doing them, so why can't they? Simple concept. Monkey see, monkey do. So now the irresponsibility of those in political power leads to a couple of problems. Number one, you wonder why people don't want to stay with the social distancing thing. However, you have people like Dana White and Vince McMahon who have permission slips with little pink bows on them to perform their specific work-related tasks. And this isn't allowed for anyone else in the world. And so people look at them and go, I want to do that. I want to do that. And then they go outside their houses, and then they create potential riots and take the police away from being first responders to people who in theory might need help because they've got the coronavirus, right? Like medical help is needed, but if people are close to rioting or uncomfortable or congregating where they shouldn't, medical personnel may not be able to get where they need to get as fast, and or police may be dealing with that when they could be dealing with other things, or the stress of the mental stress of the coronavirus could be leading to domestic violence calls that police need to respond to. There's a million things that could happen as a result of this stupidity. Now, Disclaimer, none of these have been documented as happening. Second disclaimer, I believe they're all possible to happen. Because you've taken away people's freedom of expression and freedom of choice to protect against the virus. Whether that's right or wrong is not the point of this conversation. Regardless of whether this is right or wrong in action, it has played with the mental faculties and mental state of the majority of individuals who have been affected by the quarantine/lockdown experience. So when they see, and this is natural, this is actually biochemistry of how the brain works, when they see someone doing something that they want to be able to do, they're going to point, they're going to nod, they're going to go, I want to do that too. So now you've created this thing where there's separation. Then there's jealousy. Then there's annoyance. Then there's anger. Do we really want a bunch of angry people who've been sequestered for over a month? Methinks not. But all this because people can't decide to watch something else on television. And all this because Vince McMahon, in his infinite wisdom, has decided, the rules don't apply to me. The rules have never applied to me. The rules have not applied to my family since I took over in 1982, since I went national in 1984. So for, nearly, let's just round off and make the math easy, for 40 years this guy's been untouchable. So should there be any reason for him to believe he's not untouchable? No. And if we've given him permission from political leaders to continue the illusion that he's untouchable, is it any wonder that there's a gentleman who I find ironic that his name is John? I don't know how many Johns are employed by WWE, but my mind went to one very important John when there was a quote or note that John had asked the Florida Political Assembly Board or some facsimile thereof to shut down the television tapings because he feared being close to other talents, and he did this under the case of an anonymity because, if I don't perform, then I can get fired. Now, how he can get fired as an independent contractor is a completely different matter. Because an independent contractor, which is the classification under which WWE currently operates for all its talent, should not have to report to work if they feel unsafe. Only a contracted employee could be forced to do that. And furthermore, we live in a society now where professional wrestlers, professional athletes as a whole, don't want to come up against the team or the group or the organization that they're working for, because if they do, they're going to lose potentially hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. Money that they were planning to use to raise their children and feed their families. So, of course, individuals, men and women in this sport as well as others, because I guarantee you this will happen in other sports. Sooner or later, probably later, this will happen in other more mainstream sports, where individuals don't want to go back to work, they don't feel safe, they don't feel confident, they don't feel comfortable, but they do it anyway because there's pressure from ownership that's multi-million or multi-billionaires. Come on now. We're setting a precedent that there's a class system among performers. Is that really what we want to do? In the name of the end of social distancing? In the name of giving people back their entertainment? I mean, heck, what did they do 100 years ago? 100 years ago, the last pandemic, there were probably a lot more babies born 9 months later. Anyway, regardless of what they do, what they're doing isn't going to work. And in the end, it's dangerous for all of us. But guess what? We get to see high spots. See you Friday for SmackDown. This has been Scott Golden, Pro Wrestling Logic. Keep your feet on the ground, your mind in the moment. Till next time, everybody.